I was teaching a class, and at the end of the class, he started bringing up, we were talking a bit about American politics and just the world situation. And he was like, yeah, but America's just racist, right? And I had to say, I'm like, so have you been to America? No, well, of course not. I've never been out. I said, do you know what it's like to be a Bature in Nigeria? To be a one white man in a sea of black, right? To put it very bluntly, I'm like, I will receive way more racism here, quote unquote, than you ever will as a black man going to America.
Yeah.
Ever. Because there's millions and millions of black Americans over there. It's very normal. There's millions and millions of Latino Americans. So it's normal. Everyone's used to it. Are there bad-spirited people from every ethnicity? I don't like the word race because that's an evolutionary term. We're all one race. There's bad people in every ethnicity group who don't like other people for no reason than their own anger and personal problems, right? But I told him, like, look, as someone who comes from outside, like in Nigeria, you're not accustomed, generally speaking, to having all these Latinos and all these whites and all these Asians. So when suddenly someone from a foreign place comes, right, like my name everywhere I go is always white man, right? You know how racist that would be in the Western world?
Yeah.
Right? Like off the charts, right? You can't say anything regarding any of that, right? I'd sit there and complain and moan. My day's not over.
Even the aspect of white privilege that we talk about, it's actually a form of racism.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that when we talk about racism, is that you're treating somebody different than you would treat the other person.
Just because of how they look.
Yes, just because of how they look. So it may look like it's good on this end, in the sense that it helps you get things done.
But it's also really bad.
Yes, but it's
terrible, actually, at times.
Because most often it actually shields you from the reality.
Bingo.
Lots of times. You understand? So, and as Christians, how does the Bible tell us? What does the Bible tell us to do? It tells us to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So when I'm giving you white privilege, it doesn't mean I love you as I love myself. It just feels that, okay, I think you are better than I am.
Or if I do this, and you're right, there's the Masta mentality sometimes, but there's also, if I do this, you're going to give me something.
Exactly.
Right? I will get something for you. So, all right, I tell the staff and the ministers I work with all the time, use my Bature privilege to your advantage, right? But we also have to recognize where I never should show my face.
True.
Because it's just a disadvantage.
Nah.
Right? And a huge one, and exhausting, endlessly exhausting working with politicians as a Bature. But honestly, this is one that's difficult. This gets into the theology of missions now, which is a fun conversation, because I've had this disagreement with some of the missionaries, the expat missionaries, who by and large still have a mentality of, I would say it's more 19th century, early 20th century missions, more of the Billy Graham, crusader, fundamentalist, evangelical, old school. Let's have a crusade. Let's get some commitments to Jesus and all this stuff, and then we'll leave. There's still that in a lot of them. So when a lot of them come, what I've noticed is they still come with, I want to go in the field and I want to go on a crusade and I want to go on evangelism. I want to go on evangelism endlessly, right? They want to come to Nigeria and they just want to do evangelism, a lot of them. Or they want to go into the jungle. So we had this instance where I sometimes have these tourists come now, these foreigner expats, and they really want to go and spend time in the jungles. Well, I don't want them to. And the reason I don't want them to is not that I want to keep them from sharing the gospel. It's that I've done it for years. I was the one, I pioneered that, at least in that particular ministry, and I know exactly what it means to be an expat in the jungles and how much bad attention and long-term detrimental harm you bring as a expat who wants to go hang out in the jungles with the thugs, because their mentality, how they see you and what they think about you, and then why they attach themselves to you. The last 2.5 to 3 years has been me kind of completely reversing how I've oriented and structured and built the ministry to get away from all these problems that I had unintentionally created by being the head of everything and the one doing everything. But we had all these guys coming close, even for years, saying everything they needed to because they just really wanted to be close to me. Right? And then when pastors came in, right, when Nigerian overseers are now taking on the offices, they won't submit to them. They'll ignore them. They'll try to bypass them, come straight to me. They won't receive their discipline. We had endless issues with this, right? So I've seen this very much face to face. So when I have I call them fresh Oyibo. When fresh Oyibo shows up, right, and they come with this really spirited, we want to evangelize. Usually one of the first questions I ask is, how much time do you spend evangelizing in your community back home? Why did you need to come to Nigeria to do that? Why couldn't you do that back home? Most of them don't do it back home. Some do, but most don't. They're scared of their own culture. They're intimidated of the hostilities in the West. It's nice to come to a place where the gospel's spreading and to feel really good about yourself because you got a few hands put up for Jesus. But you and I know, and our cameraman over here knows, that you can go into any jungle, you can go into any church, you can go into any community here, and you can make a quick pitch and you're going to get hands up for Jesus every time.
You can get the whole church.
You could get the mob screaming for Jesus at the end of top of the lungs, but not one person there is a Christian.
Nah.
But this is so a lot of the missionaries still, especially this new generation that's largely unequipped. Okay, this is also difference, right, between older generations of missionaries who maybe were trained like theologians or pastors and reverends. So they came largely to church plant, right, disciple maybe specific communities and such like that. By and large, the West today looks at missions, and this is because of their faulty eschatology and faulty just worldview. They look at missions to Africa as the saving grace of Christianity, right? It's like, no, to be a real Christian means not evangelizing or discipling in America. It means you've crossed the seas and you've gone to Africa, to the so-called dark continent, and right? That's the old one, right? And you've gone in there and you've sacrificed, right? And you've gone and you've evangelized and you get people's commitments for Jesus. You know how many stories I've heard like that? How many presentations I've sat through back home when I was growing up of people who went somewhere to Africa and they come and we got 50 converts. So when I was growing up, I hated missions. One of the reasons I even hated Christianity was because of all the mission presentations I heard. When I became a Christian, when I was studying, the only class I skipped endlessly in my undergrad was missions.
Okay.
I had no interest in it. I didn't want to be around people who had interest in it because I generally thought the mission community was really shallow and really vain. Really look at us. We've got, again, 50 commitments to Jesus today, right? We've sacrificed this and that and the other. This is God's sense of irony to me too, that he sends me over here, right? And then he doesn't just have me, he has me in the jungles, right? But the big difference was I never wanted that, and I never really chose that.
Okay.
But
could you also, do you think that part of the reasons why you thought in that direction could also be as a product of your culture and worldview? Now, that's you. And then the same thing goes for the missionaries, because whether you like it or not, the Western worldview, irrespective of how you want to describe it, is one that talks about enlightenment.
Yeah.
You know, wisdom, enlightenment. So even Christianity to them, the saving grace of Christianity is a form of enlightenment. So you're bringing light into the dark continent or into the dark places.
Right.
You understand?
That's true.
The Chinese worldview is about balance, yin, yang, the two different sides of the human nature, good, evil, and making sure that every part of it is in harmony. The Indian worldview is about our harmony with nature.
The one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So bringing everything together into oneness. Would you not think that the Western mindset is one of the reasons why missionaries behave like that? And then the African mindset feels that power is ultimate. So if you're more powerful,
they fit together really well. I think you're the point you're making.
You understand?
Yeah.
If you're more powerful than I am, right? So it means that whatever you say is better. Whatever you say is. So we have this worldview that it's power inclined.
Yeah.
So would you not say that part of the reasons whereby we've had this kind of imbalance, like you're trying to point out, in terms of how we deal with each other as we interface, is because of the cultural mindset that we all grew up with?
I think that's a really good point, because it also reminds me of what I've generally noticed is, for instance, Africans seem to have a much greater degree of respect for generally Western, let's just, for the lack of a better word, white expats than they do for Chinese, right? So there's something in the Western culture that is seen to your degree, like as you just noted, It's powerful. It's attained a great degree of power over the last 300 to 400 years.
True.
And in many ways, it conquered the world, right? That sun never sets on the British Empire, kind of thing. So, yeah, I think when you put it like that, because I would never want to say that missionaries come here, of course, with a bad intention, right? I don't think they do.
No.
They come with good intentions, but, the old saying, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Lots of good intentions.
But I want to qualify that, because in no way have the missionaries brought help to Africa. No, they've brought light. The truth is, even if things that have been done here have been harmful and certainly undermined the progress of the gospel has still come, right? What does Paul say? Right, even if people preach Christ for their own gain, if they preach it with he's getting at a larger idea here. He's getting at, if people preach it wrongly for the wrong reason and they don't preach it properly, but if he still preached, and at least even if it's simple but it's true, he still preached, and God's glory will grow. True. So when I look at when I look at Africa, particularly West Africa though, and Nigeria, kind of as and Ghana, Kenya, they have this too. But Africa is a hub of growing Christianity. What I see is, okay, so the gospel came here and it's spread like wildfire, right? Nigeria in particular, it is spreading so fast, and it was brought at a time when the people who largely brought it, by and large, were looking at the Western world and they thought it was doomed. They believed the culture they were seeing in the 1800s. They saw the rising tides of this secular humanism at that time in different isms. And there was the growth of the beginning of evolutionary theory, right? You had the growth of some other nihilistic ideologies, and they saw it taking shape in the industrial age. Life's becoming comfortable, complacent. People are having less need for God, and so a lot of these missionaries kind of thought, okay, the world's coming to an end. This eschatology became very prominent too. New prophecy, new revivalism, and then this pessimistic dispensationalism all became very popular in the 1800s. And the missionaries who went around the world at the time, kind of this big wave, were bringing this eschatology, this very pessimistic one, this worldview that Christ is literally about to return and rapture us. The Western world is burning up. Let's just go save as many souls as quickly as possible. So the gospel that they brought, by and large, was different from the older generation of missionaries, the Puritan Reformed missionaries following the Reformation period. These new missionaries come in with this, just save every soul as quickly as we can. And so we'll just present a simple gospel, right? Even in their mind, it was a simple gospel, I think. But we'll just present the real basics. And that's what I've countered. I think you have as well. As I walk and I come to different church, different denomination, different group, different individuals, etc., the Christianity is there. It's spreading like wildfire, and it's real. It's a genuine faith, and the missionaries too. The faith is genuine, but there's this very, very simple faith. Is that good? It's good to start there. But just as Peter says about Paul, he says, look, there are things that Paul writes about, and he speaks about that. The unlearned twist to their destruction.
It's very true.
And then there's Paul also saying, let us not remain infants.
Yeah.
Right? Let us become men in our thinking, mature in our thinking. Solomon gets at this idea too, right? Or Jesus, right? I'm feeding you with milk because you're not ready for meat. Is it Jesus or Paul?
No, Paul said
says that.
Paul was once saying that.
So there's this theme. Solomon has the idea in Proverbs too, right? There's this theme in the scripture of, you come in as infants. So it's a simple gospel that's going to save you, because it is simple enough to save babes and infants. But you're expected to mature and grow. You're expected to be renewed in your mind. And what I think we've discussed this before, you find in the church by and large, whether it's the mission community, I find, or whether it's the Christian community back in the West or the Christian community in Africa, there is this, the Christianity is believe in Jesus and be saved. And that's it.
Very true. But then I still don't know why lots of us find it very difficult to accept that, although we do not have any aspect of revelation, in terms of the biblical narrative, there's no new revelation.
Right. Amen.
So in the sense that God created the universe, man fell, he created the universe and handed it to man. Man did not meet his responsibilities and fell in the Garden of Eden. we've been living through this fall for thousands, whether it is millions or thousands, that's not even the question here. Is that since man fell in the garden, right? Talking about the young earth, old earth, we're saying that irrespective of the time, yes, we are not saying that the earth is old. We're saying that irrespective of whichever argument anybody wants to make, that man has been living under the effects of the fall since that period, right? And then God has progressively revealed to us what we missed. He first of all used Abraham and his family, yes, and it metamorphosized to Israel without the monarchy. Then we now saw Israel with the monarchy. And even at that, God has shown us progressively that, look, as long as a human being is the one that is in charge of everything, we won't get it right. We won't ever get it right. And then we see Jesus come into the picture and say, look, my kingdom is different. The things I'm concerned about, where you all are missing it, is that the things I'm concerned about really are not the things you're concerned about. Now, what am I saying is that we've progressively had God reveal his story to us. Why are we saying that? For me, I think the big picture here is that a lot of people do not think that we should also move from our earlier understanding of Christianity as offered to us by the missionaries. It's okay. Well, I think the other movement we have had is that we think that all Christianity offers you is that it improves your life. So we see this
prosperity, health and wealth.
This deviation to prosperity. So Africa, we're poor. Africans, we're poor. Lots of us are poor. And the first thing we're looking at is that if I follow God, then he'll make sure that I do well at work. He'll make sure that my business prospers. He'll make sure that I will have great kids. He'll make sure that my family works perfectly. And we also tend to forget that the real thing about Christianity is not supposed to be our story. It's not supposed to be based on what I want. It's supposed to be based on what God wants and how God has ordered his story. So I'm still saying this. I'm thinking that somehow maybe that was the bad that came from the simple Christianity that we received. In the sense that it's almost like you said, the world is coming to an end, everything is going to end. So we didn't really need anything more except just accept Jesus.
Get saved.
Yeah. So once you accept Jesus, your life will change. Your life will be better. You won't go to hell. Yes. You would go to heaven.
You'll get that new car too.
Yeah. And then before you know it, the Christian mind becomes uncritical. He's so focused on going to heaven that he has no business to do with anything on earth.
It's interesting what you just said. He's so focused on going to heaven. He's so focused actually on comfortability. And that's not different between the African mind and the Western mind.
Okay.
That's a human problem.
Okay.
Right? Because when you go back to the 1800s, and you see, you look at the Second Industrial Revolution in particular, and this is it's all right tied in. You have the evolution of these new
Max
ideologies, right? Right. He talks about these ideas, right? And so you have the evolution of these new ideologies that draw people away from Christianity, or at least they're enticing. But why are they even enticing, right? Why is evolutionary theory suddenly enticing to people, right? And intellectually convincing? Why are prophetic movements in the end of the world? Why is this stuff enticing to people suddenly? I look back at the age of Solomon. David had blood on his hand. He can't build a temple. Solomon inherits a relatively peaceful empire, right? A small empire. And Solomon is the great philosopher king. Solomon is the poet. Solomon is the artist, right? Solomon is the PhD in all these different disciplines. Why? Solomon doesn't have to fight wars. Life's good. Life's easy. So I can focus on thinking. I can focus on academia, right? When you don't have to fight wars and life's not desperate anymore, that's when you're able to enjoy these extracurricular type activities, right? The things that make life maybe more beautiful and add that zest and that flavor to life. The Western world entered that really very, very vividly in the 1800s. And especially come the second industrial revolution, where now you've got, things like indoor heating and cooling systems and refrigerators and all light, electricity now being, funneled to all these different appliances and technologies. Life becomes really good. Well, when life becomes really good, what does man do? I don't need God. I'm good, right? You go around the West today, you can go from church to church. I mean, churches in the West are more like mega strip malls than they are like royal cathedrals of Europe, right? They are a model of this idea that church is, it's a business, it's a consumer thing. I'm going to go get my quick fix of Jesus. I'm going to get my latte at the same time, and I'm going to get a nice shirt that says Jesus on it, and then I'm going to get my Jesus fix for an hour and a half, and then I'm going to go back and kind of just do the same things throughout the week, as opposed to comprehensively apply the lordship of Jesus Christ into every area of life, from your personal life, your family, to how you're running your business, how you're structuring your government, your education system, how you're thinking about the environment and welfare and cleaning up and being a good steward, all this kind of stuff. But Christianity is this, it's a veneer. It's for a lot of people in the West, it's a surface level thing. It's about, well, I'm comfortable. I've got a good life here. I've got my easy life at home. My family's in order, and I got Jesus over here on the side, and we're good enough with that. Right? So I don't need to make sure that Christ and his entire word is being applied to all of life. And this ties in hand with something you said.
Okay.
You said it's about personal testimony.
Yeah,
now.
it's about me.
The religion of the day is the religion of me. It's humanism, and not Renaissance humanism, right? It's this myopic, postmodern humanism, where I am the God of myself, I determine right and wrong. And even Christians, whether in the West or in Nigeria or in different parts of the world where I've been and I've encountered it, Christianity to a lot of Christians is about them and about how they feel and what's going on in their life. And a really good way to think of this and understand this is, how often do you hear people give testimonies about themselves, right? What's almost the number one thing in like evangelistic crusades today, like half the church services, half church programs, it's testimonies. My testimony. Is it bad to share your testimony? No. So long as your testimony is limited and pointing back to Christ and is not the thing you're sharing every time. Whose testimony has power? Yours or his? My testimony didn't convert anyone.
Nah.
If someone's born again, even through something they've heard in my story, it's because of his story being lived out through my little story.
Yeah.
It's focusing on his story. And when I see the focus in the evangelical world today, but I even see this in Roman Catholicism at times, this because they've been so influenced, especially by certain elements of Pentecostalism and charismatic theology, there's just this, again, emphasis on me, on my testimony. And Christ's testimony, the testament himself, the first witness, is put aside.
Yeah, but you see, are you not also looking at it from the point of view that the reason why lots of people try to give their testimonies is that if one of the best ways to know whether a product works is that you have evidence that it works.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
So if this is true, is it not better for people to keep giving their testimonies? Or is there a better way? Because I don't see Jesus Christ. He's gone to heaven. He's no longer here with us.
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you know that he works? Because that's what lots of our pastors stand on the pulpit and tell us. They tell us how they were poor. They used to be poor, but now because they preach the gospel, now their lives are better.
Yeah.
They tell you how they were sick or how they were bad in school and their grades were dropping. But when they became Christians or trusted the Lord, their lives changed.
Sure.
So, but is that not a better way to validate the power of the gospel? Or do you have a better way we can do that?
Yeah, the gospel itself. If you're selling a product, right? If you go and you have to sell a product and you have to showcase it, you take that product out there and you want to give usually a personal testimony, right? I can testify that this product works. I've used it in my home. I've been using it for 5 years and I swear by it. Great. But after you do that, you don't just spend the next half an hour continuing to talk about your experience with the product. You move on to discuss the product.
Exactly.
And the product itself, and who manufactured it, where it came from, right? You go and you focus now on the product. It's the same thing with the gospel. Of course, we're not doing business here. But Christians have to understand, in a very simple way, they are salesmen, right? You are presenting the gospel. You are Christ's salesman. You're the ones going out there and making the pitch. He alone is going to work, right? And how does he work? Well, he works primarily through his own product. His product is perfect. The product can sell itself based on its own efficacy, its own power, its own effectiveness, its own transformative ability. You are an aid. You're a vessel. So give your little quick pitch, as it were. Tell about what God has done in your life, sure, but focus on what he's done and what he's done in the world. And tell his story. And the reason I emphasize that part, how many Christians have you ever asked to tell you the gospel? And how well do they do it? I'm blown away, brother. And it's sad that I can hear endless testimonies from people. They're great at sharing me what God's done in their life and what's happening. Of course, the problem becomes too that people focus on the things that when you only ever hear people's testimonies and you see God's healed this person and he's worked a miracle in this person and this, you start to just expect, well, I better have those things happen to me too, right? Because this testimony has this and this testimony and this. So it becomes about those things when God might not do any of that. Your life is different. But more than that, when we only share that testimony, right, we detract from the true power of the gospel. We detract from God speaking. And we make it about us speaking and our little stories and our emotions. And then we really have to, right? What do you see people often do? They got to get really emotional. They got to pour them out, right? You got to scream and yell. You got to cry. You got to shake, right? Even if you're not Pentecostal, the large evangelical church today is pretty Pentecostalized. They've bought into this emotionalism that unless I have to convict people, I have to convince people, and I got to convince them through the power of my testimony. No, you don't. No. Share a bit about what's going on in your life, but move on from that and focus on the gospel. And again, people are really good at sharing their testimonies today, but I find that most people struggle to tell me, what's the story of the Bible? What is the Bible about? Can you summarize the gospel message to me in 1 minute? Most people can't do that. They can tell you their testimony. But if you were to ask them, now tell me the testimony of Scripture, that's tough.
So now that we've established all of this, how do we fix it? Because it's one thing to know a problem, but it's better. Like someone would say, the end of a matter is better than the beginning. So the end of every problem should be that we solve the problems, and so. Yeah. So now that we've identified the problem, now that we've first of all picked out the fact that it's a human issue. It's a human issue. So it tells you and I that this is one of the products of the fall of human depravity, whereby every one of us, like the Bible says, we have all gone our own separate ways. Yes, we've all gone astray. Everybody's doing whatever they want to do, how best they think it serves them. Yeah. Because like we've both agreed on now, although we see different shades of it, the mere fact that most African Christians, when they pray or when they speak about the gospel, it only comes from themselves. It's about what's happened to them, how God can help them, or how God has helped them, or how God will help them. And we see also from the West that there's lots of consumerism. Church is big show, so as long as the show is appealing to them, you'll see thousands flock to your church.
It's a rock concert.
Yeah, as long as it's not appealing, nobody cares. Yeah. Now that we've identified that it's basic human issues, what do we do to fix this narrative so that the message of the gospel, like Paul says, will be what is preached? Not me, not you, not my pastor, but Christ and Him alone crucified with what will be preached. What do we do to make sure that gets out there?
I like the way you drew it to that question. That's a really good question. And I think that can really get us into this topic that we wanted to discuss today all along. And for those of you who are watching, welcome to Theology Corner. At least that's the name we have for the moment. We might change it. We're just going to see what flows. But welcome to Theology Corner. My name is Joshua Emmanuel. I am the president of Jos Reformed Theological College.
I'm Emeka Opara, and I love theology. I talk theology.
He's being modest. He's a theologian, right? And he's a good teacher, and he's been a good friend for many, many years here. Welcome to Theology Corner. We've been talking a bit about missions and some stuff going on both in the States and in the West and in Nigeria here, but you naturally transitioned us really well into, well, what do we do? Okay, so this is the situation we find ourselves in. This is where the church is at today. It's largely dominated by emotionalism. It's largely still dominated by the religion of me. And even if Jesus is maybe my Savior, he's not my Lord, right? He's not my Lord in the West, and he's not my Lord in Nigeria, right? There's other powers that are my Lord, whether it's consumerism or whether it's power and prosperity, whatever it might be. I think to answer the question, we have to go back to the beginning. And this is why we're beginning here in the podcast, actually, with the topic of epistemology. For those who don't know, epistemology is a discipline of philosophy that ultimately really just refers to the study or the field of knowledge. But there's a question epistemologists ask: how do I know what I know?
What basically is epistemology?
It's the field of knowledge. How do I know what I know? Right. The question is why do you believe what you believe? How can you justify it? Right? How do you know that what you believe is true? And then how can you justify that? Right? It was Aristotle. You can go all the way back to the Greek time, but this has been a basic belief for even Christian theologians and philosophers ever since, that truth, very simply put, is a justified true belief. It's a belief. It's fundamentally a proposition. It's something I understand. So it's intellectual, right? It's true. But how do I know it's true? Well, it's been justified, And so epistemology deals with that. It deals with justifying one's beliefs, and fundamentally, then, because it's the field of knowledge, right? Really important in epistemology is this idea of, well, how do I know what I know? Where does my knowledge begin? And I think that's kind of gets us to the answer to your question, right? Where as a church, how do we move forward? How do we reorient ourselves back towards a more holistic understanding of the Bible and to grounding ourselves in that comprehensive message of the Bible, rather than just on an individualistic understanding, an emotional understanding? It's a faith that's just for me. How do we have a holistic view of the Scripture that can apply to all of life? Well, we have to have an epistemology that's rooted and built on God's Word then.
Okay, so Josh, are you saying that anybody that's not a Christian would not be able to do proper epistemology? Because
absolutely not.
Yeah, whether you like it or not. I had this conversation yesterday. Somebody said that Jesus was not a Christian. So, but then...
Well, he was a Jew.
he will tell you, I am the light of the world. Yeah. You understand? So how do I get to know that life, first of all, revolves around God, or revolves around different forces and different factors that are way beyond my comprehension? Like you rightly pointed out, epistemology is about justified true belief. And when you say something is justified, it means that you have facts, or you have reason, you have reasonable explanations that can help you understand that this thing is true. So, for instance, I've never been to America, but I know America is cold. Part of the way we know things it's transmitted from somebody else. Somebody has to, be giving you that information.
Yeah, authority.
Yeah, you can experience it yourself. Well, I've not experienced cold, the kind of cold that you have from America, but you have. And then, lastly, I would have to carry out experiments. So like I haven't been to America, but you rightly said it, that America is colder than Nigeria. How do you know that? Because you've been in America, you've been in Nigeria, you've observed the two countries, I know that difference. Now, bringing all of this back to the conversation, are we saying that both Christians and non-Christians, if we look at knowledge from this perspective, then we can get to some form of propositions, or presuppositions together. Will we arrive at certain presuppositions that helps us have a conversation on epistemology?
That's a good question, loaded question. And I might even begin by challenging and saying, well, part of America is cold, but if you go down to Texas in the summer, it's hotter than Nigeria.
Oh, really?
So it depends where you are and what time of year, my goodness. So let's back it up, because you used a good example, right? So I've been in America, I've been in Canada, right? I'm originally from Canada. And of course, up in those northern parts of the world, it's cold. Now, you said, I know that it's cold because I've experienced it. But really, I'm going to ask this question. Do I actually know that it's cold? This is we're going to do some philosophical, homework today. We're going to get digging. Do I actually know that it's cold? How do I know that it's cold? Because, I'm in one spot, and what I think is cold, the man who's been training for that or has been living there for his whole life, and maybe he's gone out in the snow throughout his life and nothing but short knickers and short t-shirt, he thinks this is warm. What are you talking about? The snow is, I'm getting a good suntan. And there's people like this. And, right, I remember growing up, I used to wait for the bus in shorts and a t-shirt in 2 to 3 feet of snow at times.
Wow. Training
for Alaska. That wasn't cold. Well, now I go there, and after living in Africa for nearly 8 years, and I'm freezing cold at plus 20. So let's back up. The question you began with was, can non-Christians have knowledge? Can they have a justified true belief? And where I'm going to start with, and for our listeners, because this is a good way to break it in, I'm going to start with a hard statement. No. Non-Christians do not know anything.
Okay.
They don't know anything, right? They do not have a single justified true belief. Why do I say that, and how can I say that so confidently? Fundamentally, because we're God's image bearers. We're made in God's image, and what the Bible teaches us is that God is truth. God is knowledge, right? God is mind, right? So God is the comprehensive collection of all truth. He is truth. He is thought, that is thinking about thought in his essence. This is part of his identity, and it's essential to his identity. God is a thinking being far more than he's an emotional being. That's a different conversation altogether. Does God even have emotions? Does he have emotions remotely? If he does, are they remotely like ours? They're definitely not like ours, if he has any at all, but let's keep focused, right? God is the primary thinking being. He is the God of truth. He is truth itself. He is knowledge itself. And so we, as the people of the Word, right, we have a particular monopoly on knowledge and truth.
Okay. So, but are you looking at it from the perspective of regenerated belief and unregenerated belief?
Even unregenerated.
Okay.
Right. I'm taking into account both here, because for someone to then justify their belief, and this is where we're getting is, well, how do you do that? Right? How do you justify a belief? How do you know that you know something? The only way to actually do that is not to just add proofs to what you think you know. Okay. Let me give you a small example here. Right? Someone might say, well, let's take the room we're in. We're in the studio room right now, and I might ask you, Emeka, what color is the wall? And perhaps you look at the wall and you say, Joshua, it's white. All right? And I'm going to ask you, well, how do you know? Right? If you want to give a proof for it, and how people generally think of reasoning, most people do is, well, I see it. Right? The wall, I can see the wall is white. That's my fact. That's my proof for how I know it's white. Right? But that hasn't proven anything, because the question I'm going to ask you now is, how do you know that your eyes are telling you the truth? How do you know that your senses, right, your eyes, your smell, your taste, your touch, your hearing, the 5 senses, an epistemology known as empiricism, right? This is a dominant epistemology in the history of thought. For our viewers and our audience, the idea in empiricism is that knowledge begins with what you experience,
what you can observe,
what you observe. And then through these observations, it somehow turns into mental images in your mind, right? We'll get into that. But if you tell me, right, okay, I know it's white because I see it, I'm going to ask you, right, how do you know that your eyes are telling you the truth? The proper way to prove something is not to add so-called neutral facts, but it's actually to work backwards, right? To justify what you believe and to know that it's true, you actually have to do something we call negative apologetics, or a presuppositional method. You have to look at your presuppositions first and see if they're rooted on solid ground or if they're on sand. So when you tell me you trust your eyes, I'm going to ask you the follow-up question, Emeka. Why do you trust your eyes?
Well, because I believe that they work.
I believe that they work. And you know what? 99% of people are going to answer that. I would answer something of the same vein. Because if my eyes don't work, how do I know that I'm functioning well in this world, right? I kind of have to assume that my eyes work just to live in this world, right? If I imagine my eyes were always deceiving me, well, I mean, there are people who've done this.
Yeah.
They've gone insane.
Yep.
Right? There's a lot of horror movies about this topic and horror stories too. But that's the point, right? You're not proving that your eyes are seeing. You're assuming they're seeing in order to prove what you see.
So what you're saying basically is that for any of us to even have any form of belief, there has to be certain a priori presuppositions,
Bingo.
some first principle presuppositions that we must take, we must accept.
Exactly.
Okay.
Knowledge is more of a deductive science rather than inductive. Knowledge works from beginning with certain axioms, first principles.
Yes, first principles.
You know, again, you're going to tell me to make it tangible for us. I trust my eyes because my eyes have always been reliable, right? I'm going to say, well, how do you know your eyes have always been reliable? You're using your eyes to prove your eyes have always been reliable. We're running in a circle here. So what? Right? Well, that's the point. You're assuming that your eyes are reliable. So your starting point is yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then that's your foundation of your belief, right? So that's the religion of me. If you're going to begin with yourself, right? If someone does, right? Fine. I trust my eyes because my eyes have always proven them right. How do you know? Just because I believe myself. So this is the religion of me. I'm starting with me, and I'm assuming I'm reliable as an interpreter. So this is my first assumption then. My whole system of knowledge is built on this assumption that myself, me, as an ego, as an interpreter, that I'm interpreting the world accurately. Because we're all interpreters, right? There's no such thing as neutrality. Right? Go back to the color of the wall. What color is the wall in here? Well, right now, you might say it's white. To me, it actually looks a little gray, but right? There's light on. Well, if we shut the light off, what color does the wall turn? If we change the color of the light, what color does the wall turn? Right? What color is the wall really? We have no idea. All we know is what our perspective is. Okay. Right? So life is interpretation. And so we begin life, right? If I'm going to assume, right, that there is no God, and I know the wall is white because I've seen it, right? I know that I know that that water is wet and that heat is hot and that the wall is white and that the air is cool. I know these things because I've experienced it. Well, I'm beginning with myself and my interpretation. So that's my starting point for knowledge. I am my own law. I am autonomous, right? That is a secular humanist epistemology. That is the epistemology of all men in all places, in all times, if they live in defiance of God. You're either for me or against me, Christ says. Either you begin with yourself or you begin with him. And as Christians, we're required to actually begin with him.
Okay, so although you've pointed out the fact that every human being begins
they begin somewhere.
Yeah, no, the axiomatic principles that we all begin with, the first principles we all begin with, actually start with ourselves. So like this person said, Descartes said, "Egito cogito sum," I think, therefore I exist. So if every one of us begins with ourselves, are we saying that every time that my presuppositions seem not to be true, are you saying that my epistemology is wrong?
Fundamentally, yes. I mean, think of a spider's web, right? The spider begins somewhere, right? Along the way, if you were to remove one of the strands in the spider's web, the whole thing's not going to fall apart right away.
True.
But if you go to some of the more core areas of that web, and you remove one of the strands, the web will disintegrate and fall apart. The question is, where are your assumptions wrong? Jesus said, right, if you build your house upon sand,
it will crumble.
It will crumble, right? Build your house upon the rock. I am that rock. Build your life upon me, upon my word, right? Christ, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, is the Word of God. As John says, he is the Logos of God, right? He's appropriating a Greek idea. Christ is the rationality, the intelligence, the logic of God, okay? So Christians then, we must begin our thinking with the Word, quite literally. So that is for us the Scriptures, because the Scriptures is not ink on paper, right? The Scriptures are the ideas contained therein, and the ideas, the propositions contained therein, are parts of God's mind, part of it, not the entirety of it. So God's given us a part of his mind. We see how he thinks, we see how he sees the world, and we get to know him, his world, and ourselves through his mind, the Word. So we begin with that Word. Non-believers, right? So Christians indeed don't begin with themselves. When you're regenerated, what's actually happening, right? Your spirit's being truly, imbued and dwelt by his Spirit. He's taking over fundamentally. And so your way of seeing the world is being replaced from seeing it from your lens, autonomy, to seeing it through God's eye view. So you can see the world truly now. You can see it clearly, right? I think it was Calvin who said when someone ultimately becomes a Christian, right, it's like taking on God's spectacles, and the Bible is reading the world through the lenses of God. But a non-believer, and I've been this person, you've been this person, we all come in the world as enemies of God, as people who do not believe, who want to refuse him, and our thinking and our emotions, everything is grounded in ourselves. Everything begins with us. So I'm growing up, I don't believe in God, but I have many things I think I know. Do I know them? No, I don't. Because I cannot justify any of them. I can't justify that I exist if I don't believe in God. For all I know, I'm somebody else. I'm a figment of an imagination. I'm part of a matrix, right? Descartes, you brought him up. He plays with these ideas. He tests some of these, right? How do I know I'm not just a brain in a vat somewhere, right? Just like the matrix idea. I can't prove any of that. Unless I first assume God, right? Unless I begin with God, I'm far, far more limited. I'll never be able to prove anything. We can talk about this more, but all I know is merely opinion. Might it be true? Sure. But I can't justify it. I can't explain it. Because the only way I can explain, no matter how sophisticated my belief is as an atheist or as a Hindu or as a Sikh or as a Muslim, no matter how sophisticated it is, it's always going to lead back to myself. When I ask them, prove, or how do you know, or why do you believe this, you pull people back to, how do you know that's true? You've got to lead them backwards to that basic belief. And that shakes people. It's unnerving. So, two things. You've talked about, from your explanation, we are looking at presuppositional apologetics. But the next thing we're looking at is the fact that it's either we look at things from God's lenses, or we looked at it from every human's autonomous lens. Me, myself, still back to the same, me, myself, and I. Now, where do you think as Christians we've lost the plot? Because I see lots of Christians today struggle to share or give reasons for their beliefs. Where do you think we've lost it? Yeah, that's something I hear all the time. Even when I give an answer, right? People are often, wow, a Christian with answers. This is unusual in today's day and age because we live in an anti-intellectual, emotional age. The answer begins, of course, with, well, we're sinners by birth. So by birth, our thinking is hardwired, for lack of a better word, to oppose God. Okay. Now we can't completely do that because we depend on him for our existence. Our very thinking depends on his Spirit for processing and thinking. Right? We couldn't think if God's Spirit didn't indwell all of us to some degree. Okay. But sin is where the answer begins. We're all hostile, and we all want to find reasons not to believe he exists. We want to find reasons to deny him and to ignore him. So that's the root of this problem. Okay? Sin, and Jeremiah says this, right? He says, the heart, right, is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it, right? A more literal rendering of the passage from Hebrew is, who no one can understand
No one can
themselves,
understand it.
right? No one can understand how deceitful their own heart is,
Mm.
right? This thing inside of us, which normally the sensing faculty in us, the feeling, emotional faculty inside of us is exceptionally deceptive, right? It almost, to some degree, it's almost there, because by birth and by nature it's evil. Its whole goal is to kill, steal, and destroy you.
Mm.
Its whole goal is to lead you astray. And so you go back 200 years. Now, the world's never been perfect, but it's a sinful world. But ever since Christ came, right, Christianity has been growing and growing and growing, and the kingdom is spreading through the face of the earth to now where Christianity is by far the largest religion in this world. And for 1,500 years, so forth, as Christianity spread, especially into Europe and then through Europe into North America. Of course, it was in the East too at points. It was in North Africa too, right? But especially in the early days, and when it spread and when it has thrived, it has always been a religion that has emphasized the word, the teaching of the word, the understanding of the word, the discipling of the word. And not just the word, but words generally. So that when you see it's Christianity, you follow the development of Christianity, and simultaneously you see the development of academics. Now, of course, some academics existed before, but the real flourishing, the real development of the sciences, of medicine, of philosophy, of art, right? I would completely argue that the real developments and the real blessings of these fields came as Christianity developed. Christianity came first because Christianity is the truth, and it is the religion of the word. And the mind must first be saturated in God's mind, in his word, to be ready to develop all these spheres of life, science and medicine and art. You first have to be grounded in the good, the true, and the beautiful before you know how to develop his world in the direction of science and art and so forth.
Very true.
So we saw those developments, right? We were talking about Switzerland the other day and just what the Reformation did to Switzerland and how that still has a legacy today, and how the Reformation has, ultimately been the foundation of the development of America, and its flourishing that it has taken on over the last 150, 200 years. But what happened at the same time is when Christianity thrived with imperfections and with sin, and there's the development of all these arts and sciences and these academic disciplines, where now, because we're comfortable, we have the wealth, we have the ability to just think, right? God becomes less necessary to modern man. We have the comfortabilities, we have what we need. Like we were talking about this at the very beginning. It's a nice way to kind of bring it full circle. We have these technologies now, right? We've got all these philosophers and physicists and psychologists. We've got all these brilliant people, all these experts, they're so called, right? Why do we need God? And this happened it really blossomed in the 1800s. You see the development of revival theology, of prophecy, of end times theology, and dispensational rapturism and such, and things like this. And at the same time, it's interesting. You see the development of evolutionary theory. You see the development of Marxism more thoroughly, especially, right? So there's this fascinating parallel between man's comfort and well-being and the development of idolatrous ideologies. And these idolatrous ideologies always seem to be far more closely tied to the heart and the emotions than they do to the mind.
Oh.
I know there's good academic defenses for evolutionism and such. But every time I've encountered and had discussions with a Marxist, with an evolutionist, with an atheist, it is never an intellectual issue. It is never an intellectual problem with the existence of God. It is always a moral one. It is always an issue of something in the heart, anger, sadness. There's these emotions that always come into play. And so, and I know that I need to talk about this a lot more, but really, we returned to paganism in the 1800s. We started this radical descent. Now, we had begun before, but we really entered into a renewed paganist worldview and day, where the religions of our day are by and large, Christianity is by and large emotional. Didn't need to apply the word into these spheres anymore. It's already happened. Life is good. God now is just someone to take care of my personal problems. It's about me now. God is not relevant to the entire world. That's been handled. We've got it. We're good. Even in Africa, there's a truth there. It's different. Africa might not have had all the development and technologies, but it has the power religion. And power religion answers that question too. Perhaps in the West, it's comfortability and technology and consumerism. Here, it's power religion. Well, God is good, but so long what I need from God is to get that new car and to stop suffering. And if I get that, we're good, right? Lord, just take away my suffering. And it's this emotional thing over and over and over, right? So the church has just kind of abandoned her historic root, which was we were the people of the word. We were the one who's developed sciences. We developed medicine and such. But go ahead.
No. You said something very interesting when you talked about the church abandoning its historical roots. So I'm going to ask you, because you also said that the church should be the basis for, or the Christian perspective should be the basis for epistemology. So could you give us a little bit on the history of epistemology? How did we arrive at, or in your opinion, how would we arrive at true history? How did we move from, the early church, Augustine, Aquinas, and even to the Van Tilts and all the current epistemologists?
Yeah, I like that.
Give us a brief history of how this thoughts or how the Christian mindset as to epistemology.
That's a good one. That's a loaded one too. So, I mean, this is this is a personal passion of mine, one of my favorite areas, and my area of expertise too. Just even in my own study, I did my master's thesis actually in the area of early modern philosophy, focusing on Descartes and Augustine. And actually, one of the arguments, the primary argument, in fact, I was making was that Descartes has largely been hijacked by humanist modernists, postmodern non-Christians. The victors tell the history. And that, in fact, Descartes is quite Augustinian. I even think a lot of Christian apologists that I revere and respect and have learned plenty from, that they are my mentors and teachers, I even think a lot of them have got Descartes wrong.
Okay.
And so it's going to relate to the answer, because go back to the early church, of course, and what do you see there? Well, it's a Greek world. So Christianity comes onto the scene. Of course, it's the fulfillment of the Old Testament, right? And Christ enters into a Greek-Roman world. Okay, the Romans control the world, but the culture is largely Greek with a lot of Roman influences too. A Greek language, Greek philosophy, Greek religious ideas, right? All a product of Alexander the Great's Hellenism. And so the early church, you see it when you read the early church fathers like Clement of Alexandria, like Irenaeus and Tertullian and Origen, right? You see the difficulty where they're bringing the baggage of Greek philosophy to their new faith. And the baggage of Greek epistemology, right? Of the Greek theory of knowledge. And the Greek theory of knowledge, there's really two. There's some minor other ideas, but there's two big ones, right? There's Plato and there's Aristotle, right? And I like the skeptics. They're a smaller group. They're really funny, actually, too. They had some really eccentric ways of promoting their skepticism, sitting in barrels. They're living in barrels their entire life on the city street and yelling at people that there's no such thing as truth and knowledge and such and such. It's funny, but they were right in a pagan context. Aristotle and Plato, let's go over it really basically so that our listeners, you need a grounding, you need an understanding of the basic Greek philosophies, because they've influenced the whole world, right? And they're still influencing the church today. And it's the Greek philosophical foundation that throughout the history of the church, you see this back and forth, right? Which side are we kind of on? So you have Socrates, of course. He's the wandering sophist who's teaching, having dialogues, this and that. Plato, right, is his best student. He's the one writing Socrates' dialogues. Plato and Socrates, especially in the early years, they write with one voice. You don't really know who's who. Later on, you get to see Plato, maybe there's a little difference. But by and large, the basic cosmology and epistemology within Platonism, right, is that there exists three primary realities. Okay, three primary realities according to the ancient Greek cosmology in Platonism. You have the demiurge, okay? The primary being. You have the nous, or the eternal mind of the world of ideas, the realm of ideas, the forum of ideas. And then you have eternal matter, materiality, right? And of all of those three, materiality is the lowest of the three, right? To simplify it, right? It's bad in Platonic language, right? And Plato had this idea that all that existed, right, eternally existed in the realm of the nous, in the eternal mind, and even us, our souls, because of course Plato would believe we're primarily soul. This body is a trap. It's a fleshly trap. Our souls were up there contemplating the divine mind, the divine ideas, and something distracted us and we looked away down to the materiality. And when we looked away, the moment we looked away, we fell. And we were now trapped and bound in this material world. And so our souls are trapped. And so for Plato, right, and this is the primary goal of what he's doing, right? For Plato, what you have is a world where humans are trapped, and the whole goal of life is to escape the body, and to return back into the eternal realm, right? There's a reincarnation idea in Platonic philosophy. So Plato believes that all knowledge, that he has what we call a theory of reminiscence. His epistemology is one of rationalism. Okay, so he's the father of what we'd call modern rationalism. So we human beings, he has this then idea that we come into the world with innate ideas, innate. Augustine goes through multiple transitions in his thinking. And not just like he shifts a small idea. We're talking comprehensive worldview shifts. For most of us to do that once in our life completely throws our entire life into shambles, and we have to rebuild, right? When you completely do away with your whole foundation and start again with a completely different religious belief. Okay. Augustine does this like 4 times, right? Just because he's a real seeker of truth. He really wanted to know what is true. He ends up in Christianity, and that's a story, maybe a story for another lesson, what brings him ultimately to Christianity. And he becomes, of course, one of the greatest defenders of the faith, especially against some of the greatest heretics like Pelagius. And in particular, what Augustine does is, as he's developing in his faith, see, Augustine, at the end of his life, he wrote this massive work called his redactions. I'm forgetting the word here. But where he took back all the things that he had said and was like, I want to be clearer on this. Again, intellectually honest. He was very ready and willing to admit when he was wrong, right? Earlier on in his life, when he was a Christian, he's an adamant supporter of an autonomous will, okay, of a more Arminian understanding of free will. Yeah. But because of what he saw Pelagius doing, Augustine actually becomes the most robust defender of grace, the doctrines of grace, election, predestination. People call it Calvinism. It's Augustinianism, right? Augustine, and it's developed as he's developing his understanding of grace. It's what also leads him to develop his understanding of knowledge simultaneously. Because Pelagius is putting forward this notion of free will, that men are born good, that men can ultimately choose God on their own strength. They don't need grace. And Augustine's like, this is completely antithetical to the Bible. I believed in free will, though, so maybe I have to relook at this, because if that's the logical conclusion of a free will, then that's not Christianity. Yeah. So he goes back, and as he's reading the scripture and he's studying it and he's studying the church fathers, right? And of course, he's a good philosopher. He comes to this conclusion, right? He understands, no, salvation is by grace alone. It's through faith, right? It's the doctrine the reformers come back to much later, right? And it all begins with God. Everything begins with God. And this was the key that I think makes Augustine such just an illumination to read. Because in Augustine's thinking, everything starts with God. Right? He very famously is the first one. It's Anselm later who says, I believe in order to understand. Anselm develops on Augustine, but Augustine is the first one to say it. Right? He's the first one to say, no, I believe, right? I have faith in order to know. Right? That knowledge begins with faith. I'm paraphrasing him here, but he has an exact statement where he says this. So Augustine's understanding of epistemology fundamentally was, I believe in order to understand. I assume, I presuppose. I begin by believing God exists and the Bible is true in order to then test it. I will never know if it's true unless I first assume it's true.
No.
It's like your eyes, right?
Yes, no, we've come full circle.
Yeah.
Coming to the fact that for us to have any form of knowledge, there are certain axiomatic truths.
Yes.
We must all hold dear to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for you to have brought it to the point that the first person to really systematize that reality was Augustine.
Mm-hmm.
Every other person seemed to, yes, the Greeks did a lot. They did a huge work, but they seemed to dance around that fact, and like you rightly pointed out, it even got to the point whereby we began to see dichotomies in our understanding of knowledge. Where like this person did, where there were 3 levels of our senses, and each one of them had their own way of helping you and I get to know. But Augustine brought it back to the fact that, look, every one of us has to have some form of faith. We need to believe in something. You understand? In order to know anything. So, for instance, I'm sitting on this chair. If I didn't believe the chair will hold my weight, I wouldn't sit on it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I have to believe that the chair would do what the chair is supposed to do.
Yeah.
How do I know what the chair is supposed to do? It's because somebody told me that this is what the chair does.
Your belief in what a chair is based on authority.
And I have to believe it. Yes. So whether we like it or not, I still say that I like the fact that you brought it down to the basics. We all know something, first of all, irrespective of the different ways we know. But we still have to believe these things. We still have to have faith that my experience is real or has a way of assessing reality. I also have to believe that the tools I used to carry out my experiments, and the standards which I measure whatever it is I am experimenting on, I have to believe that they're actually accurate. Just 2-3 days ago, I studied biochemistry, for those of you that care to know. Yes, and just 5 days ago, a chemistry equation that we believe that has spanned over 100 years was proved not to be true. So whether we like it or not, now we have to rewrite textbooks. We have to rewrite chemistry textbooks and biochemistry. I'm beginning to wonder whether it was not providence, because if I was still an active practicing biochemist, I would have really had issues, because a lot of what we held true for all the times I studied biochemistry, I would have to rethink them. You understand?
I do.
So, but whether we like it or not, I would have to believe strongly that my instruments, my standards are correct, such that whenever I take any measurements, then and I check them with the standard, it would hold true.
Yeah.
So, and lastly, the authorities that I am getting from, if I don't believe them to be true, if I don't believe my father when he tells me that this is white, because what I like to know, that's where we first got our learnings about some of these colors from. My father tells me, okay, this is white, the sky is blue, and the sun is the source of, basically the source of heat, before we get to other kinds of heat. If we don't believe those things and accept them for what they are, accept the fact that these authorities are true, then we would still not know anything.
Amen.
Because like you rightly pointed out, how do I know that this is white? I know, well, somebody told me first, but then when the person told me, it registered in my mind. And right now, every time I see something that looks white, I must always take it back and reference check it with what I was already told. If I don't believe that those things are true, then trust me, like you said about the skeptics, I would one day become a hypochondriac, where there's nothing in this world that I would always be second guessing myself. So we are still coming back to our definition of epistemology. So if it wasn't clear for anybody, I'm hoping that it's clear now that epistemology, or knowledge, basically is about justified true beliefs. And for you and I to have any form of justified true belief, we need to have faith. We need to accept certain truths,
Yeah.
whether we want to argue them or not. And one of the biggest truths that Josh has said over and over and over again that we must all believe in is that our world was created as a system by a being that is way intelligent, way benevolent, way better than anything that we ever know or can ever describe. And except we accept that truth first, a lot of what we believe in, like my chemistry equation, would one day turn out to be false. And for us, we are saying that if you don't ground your understanding, if you don't ground your knowledge in this truth, then
it's like sand.
Yeah, one day everything you ever believed in will crumble.
Absolutely. You put that well, and I like how you drew us really back to authority, right? And this is what Augustine's getting at, is what you just said. All knowledge begins with authority. All of it. Faith is that authority.
Yeah, sure.
All knowledge begins with faith. Because Augustine's pursuing certainty. Among other things, one of the things he wants to discover is truth, and certainty of that truth. This is why he went through, right? He was first different ones, but he was a Manichae, he was a Zoroastrian, he was a Platonist, right? He does end in something, because the biblical understanding of truth is more rationalistic, definitely, than it is empiricist.
Yep.
God is truth. God is mind, right? Truth then is going to be more relevant in the mind. I know it in my mind. I know things more intuitively in my mind than the physical world is showing me. The physical world, I don't know what I know about the physical world, but it changes. Well, the point is, it changes all the time, right? And this is what he's getting at, is as he's looking for this foundation, he understands the foundation needs to be stable. It needs to be fixed, right? I have to be if I'm going to build a system of knowledge, and of course, most people don't think like that, but if I want to know what I know, for me to know it, it has to be grounded in something that's stable, that doesn't change. The empirical world, right? The world of sensation is ever fluctuating. This is why you just noted it with chemistry. This is why science has gone through significant paradigm shifts, right? Where it's a complete overturn of science completely, where the old laws don't apply at all, right? No, velocity is not absolute, right? Time is not absolute, right? And that completely reinverts how we understand the physical world. And, something quantum theory has really shown us is this world is very, very unstable, right? And relativity theory shows this as well. We don't really know much about the world at all. But Augustine is getting at, look, if you want to know anything, you've got to start by believing something, by assuming that something's true. You have to have a starting point, right? If someone keeps asking me, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? Well, eventually, I can't get any more basic. I'm going to be stuck, right? Why do you trust your eyes? Because my eyes have always proven that they're trustworthy. How do you know? Because they've always proven that, because I use them, right? You're going to run in this circle eventually. You can't go, there's nothing before the first.
Yes, as long as you don't have a first principle,
you're flailing.
Nothing works.
And if your first principle is rooted in yourself, it still doesn't work.
Yes.
Because you're going to be stuck not only in relativism, right? Where it's all based on what you feel and you think. And ultimately then, if you're the source of your thinking, then who cares? Why are you debating? Why am I listening? Why is your opinion even relevant, right? Go live out in the middle of nowhere and God bless, if it's totally relative. So that's one issue. But another one, and this is one of my favorites, is the issue of solipsism, which is quite damning if you think about it, right? Because if you are the starting point for your knowledge, okay, then how on earth do you know that there's anything existing outside of your mind? I'll never understand. The good Bishop George Berkeley in England, and he was a Christian, but he brought this out because he believed the world is all ideas. The entire world, there's nothing physical here. It's all ideas processing. And you know what? He might be right, actually, because the world is God's mind projected in a sense, and right, or at least it's God's thought applied, right? He created out of nothing, and he used only his thinking. So there could be some truth to what Bishop's getting at. But what the Bishop was really also trying to articulate was he was doing apologetics, right? And he was saying, look, if you want to ignore God and your mind is the starting point, then you're stuck in your mind. And this idea of solipsism becomes a problem for you, where Everything is just a projection of your mind. My mind is like the motherboard, and this is all just the matrix that I'm producing. You're just a part of my imagination. Everyone else is. You know what this justifies? Horrible moral atrocities. And I think a lot of people are functionally solipsists, even if they wouldn't say it and don't know what the word means. They operate and act, they behave as if everyone else is just a product of their mind, right? Again, they behave as if they're God and everyone else is supposed to bow to them. Our politicians seem to be especially guilty of this, right? But to return us to the point, because you were really emphasizing well the importance of authority, right? And that everything we believe, as Augustine's getting at too, is rooted in authority, is rooted in faith. And that faith is ultimately your authority. My faith, the authority of my faith is that Bible. The Bible is the Word of God, and Jesus Christ is the Savior. That's my starting point, right? My starting point is not my experience of Jesus. My starting point is what the Bible tells me about Christ. Now that was Augustine, right? He develops that. That's practiced by and large by quite a few theologians, especially in the early church, even if they didn't always articulate it like that. Augustine systematizes it more. He gives it actual verbiage. The kingdom of men will continue to fall and collapse. God's kingdom is not identified in any one of these. These kingdoms need to collapse for God's kingdom to grow, right? So he's a good optimist in that regard. But as the Roman Empire is collapsing, and then all the institutions are collapsing, and then there's a divide that happens too because of all the. And again, this isn't a podcast on the history of Rome, but there's a divide that happens in the Roman Empire too that gets more and more segmented over time, and you have a separation in the Western Empire, which collapses and becomes very different, from the remaining Eastern Empire, which is no longer governed from Rome, has the history of Rome, but is more culturally similar to the Greeks and the Easterners. You also have a loss of a lot of knowledge transmission. Right, so a lot of the Greek understanding of the Platonic understanding of the world, and a lot of the early church fathers in their writings gets lost to the Western world. Right, as the Eastern Empire is separated from the West, and the West falls under the rule of different barbarian tribes, and slowly gets redeveloped through a feudal system into the Holy Roman Empire. The East follows a very different trajectory. And again, a lot of the early church writings, a lot of Greek writings, especially Plato's writings, they're lost to the Western world. The Western world really has one main guy. The Western Europe, rooted in Rome, the church rooted there in modern day France and Spain and Germany and then England and UK. They continue to, of course, revere Augustine and study him quite a bit. But over hundreds of years, as these collapses happen and they're separated from the East in all the writings and knowledge, they do have access to one thinker and a lot of his writing still, and that is the philosopher, as they called him, Aristotle, right? And so Aristotle kind of creeps into the church when the Roman Empire is collapsing more and more through the medieval period. Aristotle is revered. I mean, he's brilliant, right? You can't read Aristotle and not walk away understanding this is a mind among minds, right? His understanding of God is actually very helpful. There's a lot in Aristotle, too, that's very helpful, in addition to his development of the science, physics in particular, his understanding of the basic order of the natural world, right, and cause and effect relationships, and his understanding of God as the being that is thought, thinking thought, very helpful even for Christians. So there's a lot of good philosophy in Aristotle. He's very rigorous, right? So everything Aristotle develops is very much like mathematical systems. It's a logical, it's deduction. I mean, it's induction, it's inference, but it's systematic, right? It's step by step by step. And it's profound, and there's a great deal of truth in there. So these medieval Christian theologians and priests and bishops, right, and philosophers, they're reading a lot of Aristotle. And they're reading Augustine still, but they're not reading Plato, and they're not reading the early church fathers as much. That stuff doesn't really resurge until the Renaissance and the Reformation. Right? So the Western Empire is on a different, Western Roman Empire, the Western Church is on a different trajectory. Aristotle becomes one of the key guys. That leads to the development, not just Aristotle, but the development of what we call scholastic theology, right? It's really philosophical, it's really logical, it's rigorous. I would imagine 99% of the church has never read any of the scholastics because of the kind of writing. It's just so foreign to the modern mind. I love it. It's very, very rigorous, very systematic. but it's also very, very pedagogical, very instructional. And they develop a lot of their theology in tandem with Aristotle. Aristotle's the philosopher. So what Aristotle says about the natural world, about reason and such, is applied. And they develop it, right? They build on it. And so you see these two kind of camps developing where you have, the natural world, and the Christians of the medieval period are developing their understanding of the natural world more as a deduction from Aristotelian thought, where simultaneously they're also developing theology, right, from the scriptures, and they're doing it very systematically as well. Right? You've got Peter Lombard's sentences. You've got Anselm, and Anselm, of course, is a good Augustinian, because Anselm develops his ontological argument for the existence of God on the idea, right, that you begin with God, right, sure. and it's quite impressive. But long and short of it, the church slowly develops, again, the thinkers of those ages, they develop kind of these two branches of knowledge, kind of independent of each other. And it's in Aquinas where you see that those two branches systematized and explained. He develops the understanding of how to understand it very clearly. And really what he says very simply is this, that there's two realms of knowledge. There's the realm of faith, there's or grace, and then there is the realm of nature and reason, right? And as a good Aristotelian that he is, at least in some ways, he believes that everything we know about the natural world can come to us from our senses. You don't need to presuppose God's existence. All you need to do is use your senses, use your logical, rational capacity, and you can deduce a logical but also true understanding of the world. And you can justify it, again, based on your senses and your reasoning. That realm gets you only so far, and it gets you kind of really, really close to the realm of faith, but it stops just dead short of the realm of faith. And to know anything about God, then you need the realm of faith, you need God's word. Right? So the realm of reason and nature gets you this far, but then the realm of faith has to step in to give you an understanding of God, to give you an understanding of faith, to give you an understanding of sin, why we're here, what our purpose is, right? All those more spiritual things, as we might call them, that comes from God's mouth. And you need God to know those things, but you don't need to presuppose God to know normal things about the world, about the natural realm. So Aquinas is kind of the grounding here, and this line of thinking, it's not just Aquinas, he's just the biggest representative of it, he's the ground of this line of thinking that there's such a thing as pure common sense, that there's a common ground, that non-believers and believers have a common ground, that we can agree on fundamental issues. And so all we need to do to convince them is find the common ground. Okay. Find that basic belief near the bottom, one of their we have foundational beliefs in common. So let's find those foundational beliefs and we can agree on those. And then we use that to argue to the truth of Christianity.
So from what you've said so far, you're implying that the seeds of the Enlightenment, because
yes,
the seeds of the Enlightenment, and lots of people celebrate the Enlightenment today. We are sown even from the works of Aquinas. That Aquinas was the first person to begin to, systematize the different, the separation of church and state. First of all, in the sense that it's good for every one of us to have faith. I can choose to go and use the bathroom. I don't need to, essentially, yes, God is the Lord of my life. Jesus is the Lord of my life, but I don't essentially need to trust God to take me to the bathroom to go use it.
No, you're trusting that he's developed his world to operate according to natural laws, and we call that providence.
You understand? Yes. Yeah. But whether you like it or not, this is what the reformers were running away from at that point in time. Because it got to the point that people had so spiritualized church that the reformers had to say, no, we have to separate what the church should stand for and what everyday existence, which is now the state, should stand for. And that's where we began to see that need to separate church and state. Yeah, but like I said, I can go to the toilet, I can go to use the bathroom, and I don't need to pray special prayers. There are people that will pray for 3 hours just to go use the bathroom for 30 seconds. Yes.
They apparently haven't picked up David's lesson of the quick prayer.
But like we pointed out, we saw this issue in the church,
Yeah.
in the medieval church, that the reformers had to come and say, okay, no, look, we must make these differences. We must decide which is the realm of faith and which is the realm of everyday living, and which is, they now titled it as the state. So if we heard you correctly, you are letting everybody know that, look, where this dichotomy even began, didn't start with the Reformation. It started with Aquinas saying that, okay, look, yes, for every one of us to believe, to have knowledge, we need to have faith. But then there's the realm of faith, right? Where you have your presuppositions and your first principles. But then they can take you so far that you have to come to the point where you're now building on those presuppositions, which is where the realm of reason comes into play.
It's close, little separate, right? So yes, in the realm of faith, you have these presuppositions that answer the so-called spiritual questions, and only those questions, right? But it's the realm of knowledge, the realm of reason you start with, kind of, right? That's the one you begin with. All humans have access to that one, right? So we have our basic beliefs, our presuppositions, our axioms. They're rooted in ourself, our perceptions. So we all can agree on that, according to Aristotle, right? And according to Aquinas as well. And then we can reason together so far. But then if we want to step into the realm of God, right, spiritual matters, then we have to take on that different presupposition. Now we have to take on the you have to be regenerated, you have to read the Bible, you have to, and at that time, right, you have to very much listen to church tradition, right? And what has the church tradition said as well, right? So that's the divide. And you brought up an interesting point that I hadn't thought about before, but I was thinking as you were discussing that Aquinas is more the root of the Enlightenment. And as I thought about that as you were talking, I said, absolutely. It's not just him, he's formalizing it, right? He's the figure. It's these things are developing progressively. Nothing's never just an instant with one man, unless you're Jesus. But you see the roots of the secular Enlightenment more in Aquinas than I think you'd see it in Descartes. And I know that's going to get me in trouble with other reformers and other Christians even. But I would argue that, especially just as someone who has spent intimate time with Descartes and Augustine. And that's where I love reading Descartes. I found him very helpful. As a Reformed Christian, I have found him intimately helpful because he's challenging the status quo of that time, especially the Roman Catholic one, which is, right, the Romanist position, which was dominant at that time still, which is you believe because we say so, right? This is the authority of the church. Everything's conducted in Latin. Most people, if they're not educated, which most are not, they don't know anything that's going on. And Descartes' offering a challenge to that, right? Does knowledge really just begin with tradition? And if you actually read Descartes' Meditations closely, which I know even most Christians that I revere, I don't think they've done it enough. They've taken what is just generally taught about Descartes, they've read it quickly. If you read his Meditations closely, he's Augustinian, right? He's trying to first show you that you don't know anything at all, right? That he wants people to first understand that. If I begin with myself, what do I know? Nothing. But he's making a psychological point, right? I must begin with myself. He's not wrong. Augustine agreed with that too. Psychologically, I'm still beginning with myself. But while I'm beginning with myself because I'm the thinker, my thinking, where is my first idea coming from? And what you get in Descartes is he answers that actually. He says, psychologically, if you begin with, I think, therefore I am, you begin with your own soul, your own thinking. God is the foundation of all science. And then what Descartes does is he builds, not as thoroughly Augustinian as the Reformers, but he builds a system of knowledge on the understanding of God's nature. It's a little more natural law oriented, right? He takes the characteristics of God that he knows, that he's known through reason, through the scriptures, but also through just perhaps even experience and conversation. Right? God means everything and anything depending who you are. Who is this God we're building it on? Who is this Jesus? So they say, no, we build it on the Bible. So for the Reformers, you separate church and state because the Bible separates church and state. God's law separates church and state, but you never separate God and state. You never separate God from church.